Good afternoon, traders. This is Christian Farmer at Semiconductors Trade Group, and this is your end of day market recap for Monday, June 5th. I will keep it brief because we have a member webinar coming up at 5 o'clock sharp. So I will just go through a couple of the main themes and some of the price action. So here's what you have in terms of performance for the day. Qs I had highlighted. I put together this spreadsheet and the themes for our midday note that I send out by email, and things kind of changed quite a bit. Apple was not. I'm going to get to Apple in a second. I'm beating to the punch, but Qs were up close to 1%, or at least a change from the open, and they kind of came back in a little bit. One of the things that I would say here, and by the way, like there's nothing wrong with having a little bit of digestion after Friday's move. So I don't think that that's a major problem for the day. Did we have a bit of a reversal? Sure. And you could see there's a couple of things that I would point out in this Qs chart, right, which has been, of course, the leader for the U.S. indices this year, and by far, is that it's overbought. The RSI, if you use that, is pretty darn overbought. Right now it's a 76 RSI. You've heard me say that a couple times over the last week, right? And you could see this on the bottom of the chart over here. And this is actually the most overbought that it's been over the last 2 weeks. So I think that's something just to keep in the back of your mind, right? It's not the best place to be adding a lot of risk when you have the Qs, and which is a lot of growth, being this overbought. So bear that in mind. There are some things that you can kind of think about if you are trading in the high growth and the Qs areas, such as taking profit targets, right, as you go along. And I think that was really useful in particular for today. And I'll share a couple of my trades for the day on some examples where I did that. But that's one thing I mentioned. There's a couple things to note here. Here's also the 5-day moving average, right? So price is staying above that, even though we have this kind of reversal for the day. Price is still above the 5-period moving average. I would really pay attention to that if you're just looking at the daily chart, because that will that captures the short-term trend. And even though you can have some really ugly looking candles for a day, whether you really explore some higher levels and you don't close there, and you got to get a little bit of a red bar, for example, like on this day, which was back on 530. Notice you had a little bit of an inside day, right? But the trend never changed. So for now, these are really good. I'm not complaining when I say that the market is overbought. I'm just kind of telling you how it is. But this is where traders make a lot of money, when price stays above this 5-period moving average and continues to trend. So I would watch for that. Another thing that I would note too is how far down the 20-day moving average is. That to me, again, and I kind of just set myself up mentally so that I can be aware of these things and that I'm not surprised. But at some point, you'll probably get price come in to check back to the 20-day moving average, right? For example, it did it in here, right, which was close to the 20-day moving average. And notice how good of a buying opportunity that was. So that's the thing to think about too. When some traders will always get caught off guard when there's a pullback. You don't want to be one of those traders, right? You want to be cognizant that we are overbought, and that a check back at some point is in the cards. Now I don't have a crystal ball and I can't tell you when that's going to happen. That could happen this week, although we don't really have any major events this week. It could also happen next week, because we do have a Fed meeting and we have a CPI report as well. So keep that in the back of your mind, and that's why I do I go over some of these points in these end of day videos, so that you can kind of be a little bit prepared, right, and taking some money off the table a little bit. But that's what I see in the Qs chart, and I'll give you a closer level to watch. That is wait for Thinkorswim to adjust, but that's right around 352.56. Right, so here is the move to the highs, and a move back here. All right, so again, 352.56. That's your major level your first level of support on using the 1-hour chart. And again, that value area is good for this week, right? I mean, that's based on all of last week's volume at price activity. Let's talk about Apple just for a minute, and then maybe we'll talk about the small caps. If you are surprised by this price action, what can I tell you? Maybe I'm not, and again, I don't want to say anything negative at all, but this is what happens a lot of the times when there's an event, right? Apple had their developers conference, but it could be any product event. It happens with Tesla a lot. I hope you're saying it with yourself as I'm about to say it, right? It's always in trading. It's buy the rumor, sell the news, right? So it doesn't matter even how great of what they would have come out with, or the pricing or all that stuff. It doesn't matter. It's always going to be buy the rumor and sell the news, right? The stock ran up like crazy, went all the way up to 185, right? And it's just trading 101, right? So again, I know this is hard to understand sometimes, but it really doesn't matter what the actual features of the product are and so forth. I mean, it does if for longer term, right? But for today, as what I'm referring to specifically, is that you will usually see the same type of situation that happens, right? And again, like I said, you'll see it with Tesla, but back in the day, it would happen all the time with Apple's events, right? Everybody wanted to be a part of that, and everybody would know when that event was, and they would start buying ahead of time. And then as soon as the conference started, there's a little bit of disappointment, right? Because again, it's just that that rule happens over and over in trading, the buy the rumor, sell the news. So I would watch this once. Notice how it just pulled back right into its top of value, 179.58, right? I had a question, and you could always find out if you don't know what a virgin point of control is. I say VPOC a lot on Twitter. Go to my pinned tweet on Twitter. You will find out exactly what that means. We spelled out definitions here, but you can go right to here, learn more about it right here, MarketWeb's explanation, and I'll go over. But a virgin point of control is where there is a high amount of volume where price is not revisited. Okay, so they often worked as gaps. So this is one for Unity Software, which again, everybody saw calls this morning. That happened right after the open, and multiple calls that multiple times calls went up. So this had a really big move. The question is, where do you take profits in this thing? Right? And I had a couple traders like, oh, I took profits too early. I'm like, well, why didn't you use the virgin point of control? Because that's a great place where usually it's like when there's one above, it's a supply area. So again, this red line is from a point of control from another period, right? And the point of control is where the most volume occurs in a given period, which is right in here, right? And again, when we average this up, it becomes very precise, right? It was even more precise because there's one on the 1 hour chart too, right? So here you go. And this is something that we called out. I said, watch this 39 level. Right, I think it was 38.95 was the specific level, but volume will return there, and a lot of times there will be a seller there, right? It's just how a lot of times in institutional trading works, right? There's somebody who is long at that point, and they're dying to get out of the stock if it gets back to where a lot of that volume occurred, and maybe it was at 38.95, maybe it was at 39, but there's a seller there. So now what do you do with this stock? Well, I would make sure that notice it didn't close above this virgin point of control. But if you're bullish this name, you want to see it at least get back above 36.80, right? And then you can use that as your stop. Now, you could still use the 200-day moving average or down here if you like, but really if you really want to see something fun happen in Unity Software, you would want to see it stay above 36.78. All right, a couple other things, right? So I mentioned that the Qs are overbought. Where could we possibly see rotation into, right? Well, I don't know if it's back into the banks, and I'm a little bit, IWM had this big day. I think it was Tom McClellan put out a really good tweet over the weekend talking about how these big moves in IWM, often there's no follow through from them. So today was just an inside day, right? You could see that the price was fully contained in the previous day, which was Friday. So we can't really make much of a conclusion other than, it underperformed today, but it's still above its 5-period moving average. It's right at the 200-day moving average. We'll keep an eye on it. But what I think could see, if you go through sector by sector, you know, there's a couple areas that I think are pretty interesting. Number one are the industrials, right? And you know, there's a couple different ETFs that I look at, both XLI as well as AIRR. You could see another inside day in this, right? This is the Industrial Renaissance ETF. I know that's complicated, but it's an ETF I've been tracking this year because it's been a little bit stronger than the actual XLI ETF. So, you know, a name that I'm watching for tomorrow, I mentioned this on a broadcast that I was on earlier, Atcore, ATKR. I mean, notice how it's right at this level here, right? So if it breaks 126.61, you might be onto something here. This is more of a steel type name, right? Perhaps China's stimulus could get this to go a little bit further. I'll be watching Caterpillar, which I traded back on Friday. I sold it. Notice it was down 1.8% today. Let's see if it can kind of hold in there. Again, notice why did I sell it? Because it went up to this virgin point of control, took this out, and that was my target in the trade. So we'll see if it could stay above that 225 level. Boeing is something I'm still long, even though it did not have a good day today, down 2%. For me, it's got to stay above all those little moving averages, as well as 205, which is the top of value. A couple other names that you know, are interesting: the semis, right? Helen Meisler tweeted this out. I'm borrowing her analysis a little bit, but take a look at what the SMH has been doing versus the Qs over the last week. Nobody's really been talking about it, but it's been drastically underperforming. The semis, and it doesn't mean that anything bad has really happened here. It just means that the semis haven't gone anywhere in the last week. And notice also virgin point of control taken out at that. So that marked the top. Let's see how much it wants to digest. And this is for the overall ETF. Right, I'm long some ACLS. It did okay today. It didn't close on the highs, so a little bit disappointing. But I'm watching this. I'm watching Rambus to see if Rambus can get back above that short-term moving average. Right, so we want to see buyers come back into this. Synopsys, which is another name that not too many people talk about, but I want to see this is another name I'm watching, you know, a little bit of a pullback. But I think this would be a good group, you know, considering that there's been some digestion at this point. Let's see if buyers can come back in. SMCI is still a bit extended, but this is another name that I'm watching, and you can use the 1-hour chart to watch bottom of value, which is right around 220. Right. Elf Beauty is another name outside of the semiconductors. Elf Beauty is another name to watch. Right. Notice how this has been digesting a little bit, the big earnings move. But again, something to keep an eye on. And then finally, the Dow overall for the index, right? The Dow stocks, right? Notice how this is kind of setting up as in I say kind of because these patterns sometimes they look like you'll see a head and shoulders or an inverted head and shoulders, and it doesn't actually materialize, right? A lot of times you could see that in chart patterns. So we don't know yet for this. This could be an inverted head and shoulders, right? Where am I seeing this? Left shoulder, head, right shoulder. And I've got this dotted blue line as the neckline for the DIA, Dow Jones, right? But it has to firmly break that neckline, and it has not done that yet, and had a pullback today. But you know, this would be interesting to see if this group wants to push out of that consolidation. All right, guys, that's it for today's video. Have a great night. See you tomorrow.